We reward calm, submissive mind. We don't reward excited mind or dominant mind or fearful mind. Only calm, submissive mind. I like this, not you. He's calm, submissive.
Cesar Millan was never the man his fans always thought him to be. For over 20 years, he showed the world someone who had it all under control.
They have their own way of communication. That's number one. Dogs are pack-oriented. So when you invite a dog to live with you, you must take that position. Otherwise, they're going to compensate the energy that is missing.
But that image covered up a story much more complicated than anyone watching was aware of.
Chow, this Chow is just, he's never going to be calm. This guy is never going to be calm.
The truth of who he really is, where he came from, what almost broke him, and what he has been quietly building since then is finally coming fully into view. What did the fans always think of him? And why was it not until he clocked 56 that the whole picture emerged? Join us as Cesar Millan finally confirms what the fans have suspected all along. The man behind the whisper. For most people who have watched Cesar Millan on television over 2 decades, the image has always been the same: the calm, controlled, and authoritative individual. A man who could walk into a room with the most aggressive, unpredictable dog on the street and within minutes create a stillness that the dog's own family had never seen before. That image of a man so perfectly centered, so totally in command of any situation he walked into, was so consistent over so many seasons of television, it began to feel less like a person and more like a force of nature. What most of those viewers never got the full measure of, and what Cesar himself has only slowly allowed to surface into the public record, is how far the reality behind that image was from the persona that National Geographic built around it. The calm, assertive dog whisperer who made complicated things look effortless on screen was also a man who had slept under a freeway, survived a marriage his own ex-wife described as verbally abusive, attempted suicide during one of the darkest periods he had ever experienced, and spent years building a second chapter for himself in full public view, while the most personal parts of that chapter remained carefully out of frame. At 56, Cesar Millan is more publicly active than at almost any previous point in his career. He is headlining the 5th season of Better Human, Better Dog on National Geographic and Disney+, running his 43-acre dog psychology center in Santa Clarita, launching a new product line on QVC, running a live virtual coaching membership, producing new digital content formats, and doing veterans advocacy work that he calls some of the most meaningful of his career. The reinvention is real, documented, and visible. But the story behind it, the one that explains how a man who publicly collapsed in 2010 reached this particular version of himself at 56, is the story that most of the people watching his content have always suspected existed without ever being told directly. So what did fans always think? And what has Cesar Millan finally confirmed about who he really is when the cameras aren't rolling? The journey that television only told part of. Cesar Millan grew up on his grandfather's farm, where he developed such a natural affinity towards dogs that the other children on the farm gave him a nickname he eventually turned into a global brand, the Dog Boy. He knew he had something special, and that was what guided him towards the deacon he made in 1990. He got into the United States illegally at age 21 in 1990 with no money or connections and the inability to communicate in English language. The version of that crossing that has been told in interviews and documented in his books includes a period of about 2 months sleeping under a freeway in San Diego while he tried to establish enough of a foothold to survive. That detail, 2 months sleeping under a freeway, tends to be mentioned in profiles of Cesar Millan as a single dramatic data point before the narrative moves on to his eventual rise. What it really meant was a long stretch of real struggle that most of those who saw him quietly rehabilitate hostile dogs in the comfort of American homes would have had a hard time connecting to the man they were watching on the screen. He found himself in a country where he didn't speak the language, where he had no legal standing, where there was no safety net, and he decided to stay and build, instead of returning to where he came from. His first break came as a dog groomer in San Diego, where his natural skill with animals was quickly apparent to those around him. Eventually, he settled in Los Angeles, where he began working with the dog owners in the city, developing the calm, assertive methodology that would later become the philosophical base of his entire public persona. It was during this time that Jada Pinkett Smith met him and was so impressed that she helped him get in touch with the entertainment industry contacts that would go on to produce Dog Whisperer with Cesar Millan, which debuted on the National Geographic Channel on September 13, 2004, and continued until 2012, airing in more than 80 countries at its peak. The show made him a household name around the world, and even resulted in a New York Times best-selling book called Caesar's Way in 2006, and a series of spin-off television shows including Caesar 911 and Better Human, Better Dog. As of 2026, he has over 21 million social media followers across platforms and a net worth estimated at $20 million. The less told story is what happened in 2010 when the highlight reel stopped and the human being underneath it could not be kept out of frame. The year everything fell apart. In 2010, two events happened in a short period of time to Cesar Millan that, when combined, created a crisis serious enough to bring him to the brink of what he could survive. His beloved dog, Daddy, a pit bull who had been his most reliable companion and his most visible on-screen partner for years, passed away. And the second tragedy, his wife Ilusion, who he married in a union considerably more complex than the one they publicly projected, initiated divorce proceedings. The marriage to Ilusion had started in 1994, years before the television success and the global platform. They met as teens and built a life together that produced two sons, Andre and Calvin. But the same qualities that made Cesar compelling on camera, the dominance, the certainty, the unwillingness to yield to resistance, had created serious problems in the domestic space where those qualities carried entirely different implications. In an Elle magazine profile that ran the same year the divorce was filed, Ilusion described a marriage that included verbal abuse, a moment when she nearly died from emergency gallbladder surgery, and he did not come to see her for days, and was uncaring when he did. She also does a period where she moved out with their infant son and told him she would only come back if he agreed to counseling. He agreed, and they patched things up. But then, 16 years into the marriage, Ilusion filed for divorce, which became final in April 2012. Between the filing and the finalization in 2010 and grieving the death of Daddy, Cesar attempted to take his own life. He has spoken about this publicly in interviews since, saying that this was the lowest point of a life that had contained real lows, describing his recovery as a slow process of reconnecting with what had always been the source of meaning in his life, the work with dogs, the mission, and finally the relationship with a new partner who helped him rebuild in ways he didn't know he needed to rebuild. That recovery, conducted mostly out of the spotlight as the show was nearing the end of its original run, is what produced the Cesar Millan we've seen ever since. More reflective, more willing to admit the humanity of his work, more focused on the owner as much as the dog, and substantially more open about his own history than the man who first appeared on National Geographic in 2004 ever was. While that recovery was quietly playing out behind the cameras, a new relationship was already forming, one that would carry its own mystery that fans are still trying to solve 16 years later. The engagement that never became a wedding. Of all the things fans have speculated about Cesar Millan's personal life, the mystery surrounding his relationship with Jahira Dar is arguably the most specific. The Dominican-born actress and former stylist met Cesar in 2010 at the Dolce & Gabbana store in Los Angeles, at the same time that his marriage was falling apart and his mental health was at its lowest point. Their relationship developed over the next few years, and in April 2016, after 6 years together, Cesar proposed to Jahira at the top of Mount Lycabettus in Athens, Greece, on what she thought was a vacation to Spain that he had secretly diverted from. He proposed at the Horizontes restaurant with a view of the Acropolis and a violinist playing in the background. He announced the engagement on Instagram, sharing the details exclusively with people. He said he had a full pack. He said she came into his life at the right time and helped him rebuild after the divorce and the rough years that followed. He said she represented the values he admired most: integrity, honesty, and loyalty. That was in 2016. As of 2026, 10 years after the proposal and 16 years after they first met, Jahira and Cesar have yet to announce a wedding date. Neither has offered a public explanation. Jahira lives a very private life. She is the creative director of Cesar's Way, Inc., and she doesn't have a public Instagram account. Sometimes, the fans who have been following the story closely have asked where the wedding stands, and the question has always been met with silence. In fact, what the long engagement really confirms, even without any public explanation, is something that fans who have been paying close attention to the evolution of Cesar Millan as a public figure have felt for a long time: that he is a man who moves at a pace that is dictated entirely by his own internal logic and not by external expectations, who is serious enough about significant commitments to be cautious about formalizing them, and who has learned from the experience of a first marriage that caused real pain to people he loved, that the form of a commitment matters far less than its substance. Cesar's personal story has been one of gradual public revelation and carefully managed disclosure, but his professional methods have created a controversy that has not quieted with time, but has in fact grown louder with the evolution of the science of animal behavior around him. The controversy that never went away. The criticism comes from his use of what is generally known as dominance theory, the idea that dogs are constantly trying to establish a social hierarchy with their owners, and that the solution to behavioral problems is for the owner to assert pack leadership through calm, assertive energy, physical corrections, and techniques such as the alpha roll, where a dog is physically forced into a position on its side or back to mimic a position of submission. The American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior has said dominance training is outdated and potentially dangerous. In 2006, the American Humane Society reported cases of dogs being apparently partially asphyxiated during training sessions under Cesar's care. One of their representatives said his methods could lead to fearful and unpredictable animals, not the balanced companions he claims to produce. Modern behavioral science has largely rejected the wolf pack hierarchy model that Cesar's entire philosophy is built upon. The original wolf studies of the 1940s that inspired dominance training were done on artificially assembled groups of unrelated wolves in captivity, a situation completely unlike natural wolf packs or domestic dog families. Modern researchers have learned that dogs don't see their human families as packs to be led by dominance, but instead form complex social bonds that respond much more reliably to positive reinforcement, clear communication, and consistent reward-based training. The practical effects of Cesar's methods have also been the cause of specific incidents in the public domain. His pit bull Jr. was involved in 2 separate serious attacks. One of those attacks left a gymnast named Lydia Mattis seriously injured in 2017, a case that was settled in 2022. The other attack resulted in the death of Queen Latifah's dog, although that was never independently verified. Animal behaviorists have noted that suppressing warning signs of aggression through dominance does not solve the underlying fear or anxiety that is the root of the behavior. It can lead to dogs who go off the deep end when their repressed responses finally reach a boiling point. Cesar hasn't publicly abandoned his methods or made major changes to his philosophy in light of these critiques. Over the years, he has adjusted his framing, placing more emphasis on the human side of the relationship and the emotional state of the owner. But the basic, calm, assertive leadership model is the basis of everything he produces commercially. His supporters say the proof is in the results, that thousands of dogs who would have otherwise been put down were rehabilitated through his interventions, and that the academic behaviorist community's critique does not take into account the practical reality of dealing with severely aggressive animals in real-world conditions. The debate is far from over, and Cesar Millan, at 56, remains one of the most controversial figures in a field where stakes are measured in the safety of animals and the people who live with them. The real controversies over his methods were serious enough, but in early 2025, a very different kind of story began to circulate, one that had nothing to do with his actual record and everything to do with the contested figure he had become. The fake news that confirmed something real. In early 2025, a series of viral videos began circulating on YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook, claiming Cesar Millan had been sentenced to life in prison on charges of animal cruelty and fraud. The videos had AI-created voiceovers, dramatic music, and absolutely no verifiable sourcing. Distractify investigated the claim and found no credible evidence of any arrest or criminal charges. The fact-checking site boatos.org came to the same conclusion. Cesar was on his personal Instagram, posting actively, making public appearances at the exact time the hoax was spreading. The breadth of the hoax itself is telling of where Cesar Millan sits in the public imagination at 56. Viral hoaxes like this tend to cling to figures who already have an air of controversy about them, people whose real story has enough complexity to it that a fabricated dramatic twist seems plausible in a way that a similar claim about a less contended figure would not. The immigration story, the troubled marriage, the mental health crisis, the ongoing methods controversy, the dog attacks, the decade-long engagement that never became a wedding. The documented history of Cesar Millan creates just that sort of complicated atmosphere. The hoax had an audience, because the audience knew the real story was more complicated than the television surface suggested. While a fabricated story about prison confirmed the world was still paying attention, the true story of what Cesar Millan was actually building during that same period was playing out on several fronts at once, far from the tabloid headlines. The reinvention that confirms what fans always knew, what the fans of Cesar Millan have always suspected, and what his public behavior at 56 has now confirmed across multiple simultaneous projects, is that the dog whisperer persona was always a compressed version of a considerably larger and more complicated person, and that the person who existed underneath that persona was capable of considerably more than a single television format could contain. In March 2025, he launched the Pack Leadership Community on his Training Cesar's Way platform, a live virtual coaching membership that offers pet owners weekly direct access to him through live Q&A sessions and behavior demonstrations. The format is a step away from the high-production television model to something a lot more personal and direct, a live conversation between a teacher and his students without the editing and framing that television demands. In 2025, he created a new content format called Walking with Cesar, casual long-form walks with celebrities and their pets, focusing on real conversation over dramatic transformation. The specific appeal of the format was demonstrated in a June 2025 episode featuring actress Karen Gillan, where two people walked and discussed the psychological nuances of pet ownership, without the manufactured tension that the original Dog Whisperer format depended on. In May 2026, X-Cell Brands announced he would be launching a new multi-category pet product line called Trust, Respect, Love by Cesar Millan on QVC in September 2026, a collection of pet essentials and lifestyle products built around the three principles that have defined his training philosophy across 2 decades. He has also been doing sustained work with veterans, pairing service dogs with former military personnel in ways he calls the most rewarding work of his career. The veterans' work, the more accessible digital formats, the product line, the ongoing television presence, all add up to a picture of someone who has taken the platform that Dog Whisperer gave him and spent the decade since that show ended finding out what it could be used for beyond ratings. So now that Cesar Millan's full story is out there, what do you think? Does this change your perception of him, or does it explain all you suspected already? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.